I'm here again with E.A. Koetting, or as I'll call him for this, Vdoz, Uwa, Nuz, Dov, Guz, Mux, Nu, Nuv, which is the order when rearranging the gatekeepers to fit in with the cosmology of the Yezidi.
Oh, okay.
Which fits in with which in order is taking it back to its Avestan roots is Angra Meniu, the destructive spirit, Gnog, Menog, stinking body or mentality of corrupting or something, Akamana, evil thought, Indar, stifling, Naan Hathia, discontent, Sarva, oppression, Ta'arvi, destruction, Zauri, poison, and Ashma, which is wrath, and it's also disobedience, which happens to be the one who is the subject of your next compendium, which is, are all submissions in, or is there still time to?
You know, at this point, I believe that we have all submissions in for Asthma Day. That'll be released in I believe late next month, and so yeah, we've already got that being edited and ready for the printing press. And then we'll have the final gatekeeper being Satan, which I've kind of mapped along. You know, when you use a name like Satan, you've got to kind of parse that out a bit, because there are so many Satans that have been put out there. But this is specifically in alignment with Leviathan, Yamne Har, you know, Hydra, the serpent of the deep, and the bringer of I guess the apocalypse, the bringer of the final destruction.
Well, in the Sumer, in the Mesopotamian, it seems that that the Satan figure would be. You could either say the Satan figure is a female, or that Satan is the offspring of a female, which is really, you know, Tiamat is basically like a Satan figure herself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and in the Sumerian and Babylonian mythologies, it's many of the most prominent figures are feminine. I mean, even you can even look at that as being the first Jesus type figure being Ishtar or Inanna, and the descendant of the underworld myth being very, very closely matched to Jesus's supposed life events. So the essence of Tiamat is interesting, as well as the ancient ones in general, as that does seem to tie into my gatekeeper workings in the cyclical revolution, that you have these ancient ones that rise up in the end of days, or in at least the bottom or the top of the cycle, that they return, that they once were either dead or bound or sleeping, and that they return. And we are seeing a pretty massive return and a turning of the I think the patriarchy, that we're seeing that being toppled. The exposition of the sins of the elite is being is very obvious.
So, how's the patriarchy being toppled? Because it's like you look at the top positions of politics and business and all this. It's like what, Oprah and a handful of others versus all the men. So I'm not sure what you're.
Well, the system itself is being brought into massive question. I mean, even so you mentioned Oprah, for instance. That I don't necessarily consider her to be against the patriarchy at all. In fact, just a part of it. I'm not necessarily dividing this in terms of physical gender, but in terms of the oppressive and power elite, and that is being toppled. We see. I mean, what do we see? We see police. The police are being chased out of their own cities in some cases. The police are being not only questioned but rallied against.
And videos making fun of the TV preachers, all the top TV preachers, the salaries that used to be in those positions, if you look at that alone, they're all way down. Coughlin used to be worth $1 billion, and he's worth like 300 something million, and so is Pat Robertson, and the videos making fun of these people get a lot more views than the actual than the other, and people are starting to realize that sort of order. It's like when Christians got a hold of a lot of mythology, it lost a lot of its power for the people, it seemed. As much as there were priesthoods and stuff like that before, it's like Christianity's a Mithric faith, and even before it became that type of Mithric faith, it was never this groveling, I'm not worthy sort of thing. Even to the point where you had to really, really prove you're worthy through the army or something else before they even accepted you.
Yeah. Well, and Christianity is quite Mithric, where I mean, you can even once again, it is interesting to map the various figures in religions and mythologies, to map them against one another, and you can see that there is quite a bit of overlap, and Christianity seems to overlap against Mithraism really, really closely, and with Mithra himself. So.
Of course, not all the mentions of Mithra are like it's an intercessor god that you rely on to do to make the deal that you won't directly do yourself. But that did make its way in by the Roman Empire.
Right. One, we look at the works of the apostles that supposedly worked directly with Jesus, and what Christianity supposedly would have began as, if we're to take those as being literally true. The words of Jesus are not being followed by most Christians, and definitely not by any Christian organization. Yeah, he was very specific. Don't worship me, worship only the Father. And
the one person who called him the Son of God, remember how the story went. The one person who called him a Son of God, like he meant it literally. Instantly, the guy's like, "This dude's crazy, and this guy's possessed. Let's do an exorcism."
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. That's the whole. There are a lot of interesting twists and turns throughout the scriptures, and really you'll find this in every scripture. I started seeing this really intensely when I was working through the Viking mythology and looking at the various Norse Eddas, and I was going, wait a minute, this Loki guy is out of control, but he never seems to get captured. And when he does get captured, he'll stand trial, which is not a problem at all. He'll turn himself over to the authorities, and then he's able to play games against the egos of the other gods to get off scot-free, sometimes to get off with even a gift in hand. And so I started looking at that, going, well, this is hypocritical. That's I think the first conclusion to arrive to with seeing any of these inconsistencies as well. There's hypocrisy going on here, but you look just a little bit deeper, and it seems a little too obvious to just be hypocrisy. In fact, it seems to me like that the authors of these various spiritual texts are weaving into them loopholes that are there intentionally for us to understand some deeper meaning of this. So even the title of Son of God is interesting, because that was hardly ever actually used by Jesus himself, and instead he was referred to himself as the Son of Man. And interestingly, the only other entity or being that had that title given to him was Ezekiel. Ezekiel happens to be one of my favorite Old Testament prophets, and is the only prophet that we see record of that was told to do the same thing that God did, which is to take the dust of the earth and bring it into a body form, and then to breathe life into it. And so he was basically given the keys of creation of life. And that in itself is pretty intense. But the whole Son of Man is an interesting
and an interesting side note to the whole Son of Man. If one of the terms that's often, Prince of Degeneracy is really more a better translation of it. I used it. It's in one of those graphics I sent you. Saurut, Sorath, and that's rendered as son of man in some context. And the exorcism I'm talking about, that passage, basically, okay, he's in touch with these abyss entities. So what's this abyss, and why in the world are they on his side? It's like, oh, okay, I'll go into the pigs. But if one mentions, I'm kind of pinned down here, but if you look at some scriptures per se, only in the Christian part of the Bible, you get this idea that maybe in the Quran and in the Tanakh you have oh, I'm kind of shaky, so but you have the idea that Satan is, humans are still totally responsible for their behavior. They can't say, oh well, Satan made me do it or something like that. But when you get into the New Testament, it kind of has that sort of feeling that maybe Satan can make you do stuff and whatnot.
Well, there are a couple of real interesting things about that. So Jesus is out doing his miracles and walking the earth and doing his 3-year missionary service. And as he's doing this, he has one spirit that is a constant companion and guide, and that is Satan. And he's constantly speaking with this spirit and receiving interesting pushes. Satan will nudge Jesus to do something, and it almost seems like a dialectic process where Satan will tell him. It's almost like when you've got a girlfriend that asks, "Hey, does this shirt look nice on me?" Or, "What do you think about this shirt?" "Oh yeah, that's good." "Oh no, I hate it," and they go get another shirt. Well, they're not necessarily looking for an answer. They're looking for that dialectic push where you'll tell them one thing, and that gives them just enough yes for them to say no. And that kind of seems like that's what Jesus was experiencing. That Satan would say, "Hey, why don't you settle for lesser powers?" And in a lot of cases, that seemed to be what Satan was doing. Why don't you settle for lesser powers, or settle for something that's less than the glory that is yours? And Jesus says, no, but he needs that temptation to the mundane, I think, in order to really embrace the full transcendent nature of who he can become. And so Satan was a constant presence there. As far as the free will of demons, that's an interesting thing on its own. So I was raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka Mormon, and in that mythology, Adam and Eve left the garden, and that was the first step in the plan of salvation, that we had to first fall from grace and experience our sinful nature in order to be redeemed from it. And so if that was the plan of salvation to begin with, then I wonder if Satan would be rewarded for doing such a good job of working within that plan, as well as Adam, Eve, Cain, and so on. That all of these figures who sinned, their sin was essential to the plan of God, and therefore, I think they're owed some sort of some sort of reward for doing such a good job and working with.
I've seen from a couple quotes of yours that you're exposed, and a couple of your live chats, that you've been exposed to Ekankar too. And if you remember, the Kal Naranjan or Jot Naranjan, meaning aside, is that basically not your ordinary devil figure, but the Kal force. Well, it has its role too. And interestingly enough, if 3 things that we're to break free from are unnecessary guilt, shame, and fear, the highest without fear are time without fear, depending on whether you use Jot or Kal, is quite the one to identify with. And if you look at the names, going through the Gachtaya and other such things, that there's always something to identify with, even outside of whatever category they're placed in. There's something about the name for that left-hand path aspect of it. you know,
Yeah,
here's this.
when I did start exploring Eckankar, I mean, first off, I'll say that it's a very valuable system and has some very valuable teachings. Um, but it's also kind of gone the way of just about any religion that endures beyond the creator's expiration. You know, Paul Twitchell being the founder of Eckankar, and passed away well, quite a while ago, and it's gone through, you know, Darwin B. Gross's hands, and now I believe Harold Klemp is still the supposedly living act master, but the organization itself has definitely deteriorated. But yeah, when I first started looking into that, Kal Niranjan, I figured out, well, I was looking for the devil figure to ally myself with, and Kal doesn't really, I don't know, it doesn't really necessarily fit into that because it is limited mainly to the causal planes. That you do have the planes of action and reaction and duality, and that Kal is the destructive and chaotic force within that. And contrastingly, Satan, that name is so it's been overused to the point of being just about impotent. But the Lord of Darkness, in my view, exists beyond causality, in the acausal itself, and that does seem to place it a bit beyond Kal Niranjan. And so yeah, but
And
but
they categorize it in an emotional sort of sense, and that's you know, there's more to it than that. It's like the it's why H.P. Lovecraft, he didn't try to over-explain things. And okay, yeah, it's fiction. He did have nightmares and did have a background in comparative religion, so there was connections that he was trying to get through. Well, so, I think he had visions too that were kind of nightmarish, but he never. He always left somewhat of a mystery. It wasn't that he described every little bit. He was saying there's something even beyond that, and that sort of, if one refers to the cosmology I mentioned at the start, Ahriman or Angramenu is seen as the universal. So the lion and the snake and the vulture, or whatever you're going to understand it as, that's not it. It's something way beyond this world in terms of evil, as people would call it. But everything's evil to somebody, right?
yeah, you know, when we and you know, there is I guess what you could call the abyss, the unmanifest, or even if it's even beyond the unmanifest, it's almost the anti-manifest, and so even putting the term anti to it does bring it back into the causality and dualistic nature of you know, Kal Niranjan. But there is existence beyond that, things beyond that, and in first trying to peer into that, it'll seem like evil, it'll seem destructive, it'll seem malevolent, and if we gaze into it just a bit more, and specifically as we drop mind and stop trying to evaluate it with our standards that we develop as these monkey beings, that it is order that is so ordered that it's beyond our perception, and so to us it would seem like chaos, and yeah, and so we look at that and go, oh, that's evil. Well, that's even a more perfect order, and you know, the terms of good and evil and such are confusing at best. You know, that yeah, good and evil are far too relative and subjective to really, you know, put your hat, you know, hang your hat on, so to speak. But there is the force, you know, of the Lord of Darkness, as I would refer to it, that is the essence of change, unknowable change. A change is so intense that there's no preparation for it. You know, and I do see the spirit of that very strong in this planet, among our species right now, for sure. As we see ourselves coming against a lot of different changes that we're just simply unprepared for.
Well, like as I said with the earlier name of Azazel, Malak Taus, or Moloch of the Bible, as Gnog Manog, but okay, the peacock form. But even if you look at it, it's supposed to be year 6,770, and this is when, as a peacock, came down, but also came down as a black snake with white dots and other forms to teach humanity. But even if you look at the 1162 Book of Revelation, and somewhere about that, the Himashik Adi and the Black Book of the Yezidi, even if you look at this translation / representation, you get the idea that the Yezidi path, without defining it further here, is one where you can do or not do anything as part of it. So it's a whole new definition of it's a whole new definition of what you call evil or spiritual path or whatever.
There are 101 names of Agramanyu or Ariman, and one of those is the giver and taker of nothing, and I love that because it kind of hints at what you're saying as far as that there are no commandments, nor are there any offerings that'll suffice, or that'll necessarily even be asked for. But for instance, I just yesterday I did an evocation. I guess you could say invocation of Satan using the Satanic Bible, LaVey's methods, to see if I could have Satan anoint a work that I am engaged in, and that I'm doing behind the scenes and in the shadows, hopefully for forever. I've got what I do with Become a Living God that's very very visible, but I'm engaged in a lot of things that are not. And so I asked for his blessing upon this, and he said, "Well, what do you want? What do you want to do?" That was the main message of the voice. Is I'm going, well, will you bless this? And he says, well, what do you want? Do you bless this? Do you consecrate your own work? Okay, well, that's interesting. And in most cases, that is what the Lord of Darkness does when we turn to it as a patriarch, as someone that can tell us what to do because we're not necessarily fully confident in what we're doing, that he does return that to us and say, well, what about you? What do you want? And yeah, the giver and taker of nothing is perfect because it does place the authority and the responsibility back into the hands of the asker.
And if you look at, it's sort of a sidetrack, but Crowley kind of got one of his formats from the Kabbalah, the mother, father, and the child stage. Of course, people always say, "See, your child stage, it's immature," and you really don't give up any of these, and you also don't have to limit your idea of the divine or the spiritual whatnot into these genders and stuff either. But first you get your relationship sort of gratefulness and that or whatever, and then you move on to your rules and your skills, and then you got to figure out what puberty does to us naturally. It's like you look at all these cults where people are forced to marry their uncles and stuff, or whatever the deal is. It's not the people that are already in their 30s or whatnot. It's not the preteens. It's the teenagers and stuff that are turning them in to the feds or whoever, are leaving and realizing it's not right. I wasn't, something was wrong with how I was raised, because naturally, the psychologists tell us that it's just, when we hit puberty, we have the ability to choose with our independent morality. So no matter how we were raised, there's something else that's just going to pop in at that point.
Yeah, and there is. So part of that's obviously the kind of the biological aspect of that cyclical pattern that I referred to, that we do push against the the elder gods being our parents and society, and try to find ourselves and assert our autonomy. And in the process of that, yeah, if there's enough wrong with what's gone on, enough that you can point to as being not good, that you don't want to integrate into your life going forward, then it gets pretty obvious that you push against that through, you know, outing the corruption or turning against the parents. You know, here I actually have one such cult that was established just down the road from me, being the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, being the polygamous sect that was being run by Warren Jeffs. And you know, they will absolutely just throw their young men out as soon as they hit puberty, because that's competition. That's mating competition. And if you want to have multiple wives, well, you can't have too many boys running around either. And in interacting with a lot of these fellas, especially, you know, as I worked construction and cabinetry, et cetera, that I would work with a lot of, you know, 12, 13, 14-year-old boys who ran away or not run away, they're actually called throwaways or lost boys, that you get to hear a lot of how corrupt that really is. And all of those systems are manifestations of that patriarchy. And that is, I mean, you can even look at the Me Too movement, and that is a push against the patriarchy. And there's not much, there are not many places for anyone to hide at this point, to hide your sins or to hide yourselves. And that's it. For me, that's exciting. You know, one of my I guess I could see it as a character flaw if I was being harsh on myself, but one aspect of my being and my public persona is that for the most part, I try to be pretty honest about myself. I mean, sure, you know, I use showmanship, just like you know, anybody who wants to be successful will have to do. But as far as the things I reveal about myself, if anything, I'm far too honest, and so I don't have too many concerns about what might be exposed, because I'm always the one exposing myself for the most part. And that is the safest place to be, I think, is to be exposed by your own admissions. And then there's no sheets that anybody can ever pull and say, aha, we found the wizard behind the wizard. And it just is already all there. So.
And oh, well, that's, my comment wasn't directly related, but well, it's still along the same lines. But it's like when you get in that stage, I mean, this is, you know, it's basic Islam. There's not but one of the lines in the hymn to Sheikh Adi is, "I am the Sheikh, the one, the only one," and that's what you get to, is that whether you're looking into something directly or whatever, is that you're the one in charge of your spiritual life. And as they would say, you either well, I mean, to use, you know, the Lovecraftian word of Nexion, well, I mean, he's not the first one to use it, but he definitely made it popular, that either become a Nexion as a clay being for the fire beings, or you become of their company. And that's what, you know, the hymn to Sheikh Adi kind of, you know, all the grimoires to follow, pretty much, you're going to see elements of what's coming forth through that, that you're setting yourself up in that company. As I said, it's, you know, a wide variety of beliefs and practices, where you do or not do pretty much whatever, you know, as part of one's spiritual thing. I'm not articulating well, am I? But yeah, you establish yourself as one of the company, and that's part of the reason why you do evocations, and that's why, you know, music isn't just some frivolous thing to them. It's an effectual thing. You'll see certain artists have got that down. It's like Metallica has a certain style, and it's designed to have a certain effect. It's like they break up minor and major chords into the different notes and play it that way, or they or they try to play a scale and they skip and replace minor and major chords and stuff like that. And that's basically the Metallica formula. Other artists per se might deliberately try to create the drug-like experience. It's like there's a couple Led Zeppelin songs like Achilles' Last Stand and stuff that you really see some of what these people experimented with coming through in the music. But they also studied the magical use of music.
Yeah, I mean, so you even look at the music, language basically would have begun as music being made by the vocal cords. When you sit in at least I'll personalize this. When I sit in a circle of just a few people and we do a bija mantra, I'll set the timer for 24 minutes and just give the instruction that everybody just give the sound, whatever, if we're doing ah or o or e or whatever the mantra, the bija mantra is that we're focusing on. Don't worry about whether or not you're timing it with mine and whether we sync up or not. But just give it as you want to give it and try to give it, and as you're exhaling that sound, that you're focusing on the ecstasy of it. And as I do that, I can feel a connection that goes back in time to almost prehistoric ancestors, sitting in a cave somewhere doing the same thing. And it does seem that would be the rise of our ability to form language, would be just from sitting and making these mouth noises that are beautiful, and that then would have converted itself over to language gradually. And yeah, the music is very powerful. I wish that it was a talent that I was given in this incarnation.
The around 40,000 years.
It was not, but I do enjoy it. I question. Oh, go ahead. Oh.
Around 40,000 years ago, humans pretty much starting from one point, and then we all merged. So all these races and stuff we have nowadays didn't really exist at that point, but we all kind of descend from the same group of people from that period. I'm not saying humanity didn't go before that. I'm just saying for some reason, language as we know it, where people make over 200 vocal sounds, started at that point. And an interesting thing that's mentioned in the Black Book of the Yezidi, of that particular Sufi sheikh who translated and represented through his, that we're believed to go through a 40,000 year period. So we're coming to about the end of a 40,000 year period, and something to follow. So there's supposed to be maybe a whole different form. It's sort of unclear, but it's interesting that 40,000 year period is brought in, and the last period was something happened to our language. So what's going to happen to humanity next is kind of,
I'm a big fan of Elon Musk, and obviously he's kind of a bumbling idiot with some things, but an absolute savant with others. And one of the things he recently put out on Joe Rogan's podcast, and then followed that up with some actual publicity, was his Neuralink that he has in development. And I guess, when he says it's in development, but at the same time is able to give a timeline of 5 years max for its implementation, that makes me think that it's already been developed and it's in the trial phase.
Well, look, if you were, I think it was on Fox, one of those alien shows or something back in like '94 or something. They were telling us basically the size of a zip drive, an inch by an inch by an inch. Basically, we're going to look at something that's going to hold basically a couple terabytes of information. Back when not everybody had a 3.5 floppy was, at that point, was pretty much the standard that everybody had. The video games were coming on it and that sort of thing. They were telling us, you're going to have terabytes worth of information on a thing that big. And so the government had it then. So we're looking 20 something years ahead, what they have now,
Yeah, well, and even so, I love watching what Elon Musk is doing, what his companies are doing, and before he started selling the Tesla at prices that could be afforded by most people, and then I mean they're still coming down to that range for sure. I can't afford one. I know that. I mean, I guess I could, but it's I got other things I want to use my resources for. Before he started putting out the wave after wave of Teslas that we now see on the roads, he first had he had to build the infrastructure. He went to even small cities and put Tesla charging stations, usually right next to a Starbucks, but wherever he could have it hosted, and so he had to put the infrastructure in place. And now we look at the satellites that he's just funneling these satellites into orbit, and that there are supposedly going to be a whole lot of them, and at the same time, we see 5G is being implemented quite a bit, and 5G is way more bandwidth than what we need to download porn or to watch YouTube or whatever. And so there is the question of, well, what is this doing? And obviously, you have all kinds of conspiracy theories that come off of that.
Well, they've known about the frequency for about 100 years, and they had tests to basically what they're using is not what. They showed what would kill people and animals and stuff like this, and how much exposure and that sort of stuff. It's the heat from the cell phone's more of a threat than the 5G.
Yeah, for sure. And I say for sure. Not being a scientist by any means, I'll go along with that. It seems unreasonable that would be a cancer-causing agent, but I don't know. Maybe possibly whatever. But more interesting to me is the capability of it, and that capability is not needed to do things on our cell phones, but once again, in an interview that Elon did with Joe Rogan, he did this one a couple years ago, or maybe it was only a year ago, and in referencing his Neuralink, he says, well, the biggest issue is the bandwidth, that our minds, our brains are working too fast to use traditional bandwidth. And so we see 5G out there with an enormous bandwidth, and it could be absolutely the infrastructure for this Neuralink. And what this is going to do is allow the brain to directly interface with the internet. And from what Elon told Joe Rogan in his most recent podcast is that that this will make speaking obsolete. The speaking will be an interesting throwback, like listening to a vinyl record, but that we won't need to speak to each other. That we'll have an instant flow of idea. And
well, look at like what 20 years ago the Chinese were saying that because Chinese is of the major languages is the one you can read the quickest. So they said color code it. So I basically that's heavily influenced my art for a long time. Is that I'm the one. It's like I don't know why I don't see this from other people. Other color coding the attributes of these magical charts and stuff, as one would call it. It's like the Nokian all have not just fire, air, earth, and water, but the Jupiter, Venus, Mars, and all this stuff, and I'll have quite the color scheme directed. So instantly my eyes can categorize everything I see on these tablets by doing that. And I mean, I could do it without even the charts, a lot of this stuff, but
that's even recommended for collegiate note taking. Sometimes if you have a course with a professor that is really in touch with how the brain retains information, you'll color code your notes. If it has to do with this part of the subject, then you'll do red and whatever, and to do it all by personal association rather than some sort of systematic format. And a lot of times what you'll find is that there is a systematic format that does emerge out of the organic predisposition, I guess, that we just kind of look at it and go, well, red ought to be for this sort of idea, and you'll see that emerging quite a bit. But regardless, yeah, you do have a color is a really intense communication for sure, especially when it's a color that's surrounding ideas or surrounding thoughts and words. And yeah, putting that against a Chinese language format could be really interesting and useful for sure. Enochian seems like it would lend itself really well to that sort of charting.
The interesting thing about Enochian is that, well, not only was, well, this is sort of a side note because this isn't really connected to the, the subject I intended here, but what happened with Jason Liu, as good as he told the story of how John Dee and his Enochian related experience was about one of the most influential political religious things that ever happened. It's even deeper than there's even more to it than what he said. But I mean, he's writing before you had a formal Goetia. Some of the Goetia entities were mentioned. You have the arrangement that you see on the pentacles and stuff like this. This started with John Dee. So he revised what was going around in these various manuals and side mystical text. And I mean, at the very least, that's what he was doing. But the demonology in that system is, I mean, there's very little to match that comes after that you'd say is as comprehensive or
to touch back on the Black Book of Satan, though, that's I first came across that, like I think most left-hand pathers came across that as in the Satanic Rituals by Anton LaVey, and I was sad to find out that was pretty much not true at all. It seems like LaVey just kind of took liberty of making a good deal of that up, and from all the research suggests, it is difficult, if not impossible, to find an actual, the actual canon version of the Black Book, unless it sounds like you've done quite a bit more study into this than I have. What is a good resource for people to be able to turn to, or for me to be able to turn to actually find that text?
Well, finding the, I guess it looks like Arabic is kind of it's almost impossible to get a hold of the Arabic. There's a couple. I don't even remember the source that had the text printed. But as I'm saying, it's, if you look further back, if you trace some of the things that the astrology as we know it, not just here's stars and that sort of thing. Belief in reincarnation, it made its way to the Greeks before the Hindus, but it came from this Kurdish area. But that culture was farther extended. You're familiar with the maybe not the Therianthropes, the beast man figure that for 17.5 millennia there was this. It was the most common religious symbol, and it was, well, I guess maybe you might not like the word religion, but you know what I mean. It's a spiritual relationship driven sort of symbol. So where you have the human, and then you have it with 6 or 7 other animals. You got the owl, and you got the horse, and the stag, and the lion, and that's that sort of thing. I don't remember what point I was making with that, but you can trace out some of the beliefs from the Jews and the Christians and the Zoroastrians before after the priesthood they put back in a lot of the Yezidi beliefs. I mean, it wasn't quite called that at that point. Yezidi is a term for something older, just like Zoroastrianism is a term for something older. But you'll find physical remnants of this team of 7, and possibly even the other 2, 1 or 2 over them. Azazel's the agent, basically. But you'll find a lot of these remnants going through a lot of cultures. So it doesn't quite start at that point. But you find out what's happened over. They've endured about 73 now, I guess, persecutions. And one of the things they hate the most is to be forced to enact the worship of, whether you call it Allah, Yahweh, Ahura Mazda, whichever of those type of names you have it. Of all the things they're persecuted towards, that's what they don't like. And they do call their entity Shaitan. In Avestan, it doesn't quite mean the same, but cast out of a place. And they make their pilgrimage to Lalish, where they basically, Azazel and his sword, it cleaned off his sword and set up it with his team of 7, which, is it NBC that has that peacock logo?
I think so.
Yeah, this stuff, the Göbekli Tepe culture is linked to them. And by that, I mean, of course, there was a whole series of sites. It wasn't just Göbekli Tepe. I think I'm saying that right. But yeah, you can trace a lot of this stuff way out. But as I said, it's difficult if it's supposed to be, okay, they're in relationship with not the light beings and stuff that the other paths are part of. The Devis or Ahuras, they're not really on that side. So, when you have a varied thing, and pretty much every group that decides they're going to persecute a religion is going to go after them, it's kind of difficult. And to prove they're ancient, you look into who followed Cyrus. Cyrus, who is Dhul-Qarnayn to the Muslims and the Jews, and also the Messiah to the Jews. So Cyrus the Great, the people who followed him started persecuting religions. And the first ones they went after were basically the Yezidi, which comes after worship-worthy and angel, but not quite the same sense of angel as... English is so ambiguous with some things. You don't know what people mean. Angel is one of those terms. You just don't know what people mean.
Yeah, with the language being pieced together from the smashing together of French and German, right at the time that the Christian religion was enforcing membership by the edge of the sword. It's the English language itself is filled with really dualistic and even monotheistic reference, and so it doesn't...
and that's one of the tricks too. The fact they call it monotheistic. If you call Christians a monotheist, you're going to have to call pretty much everybody monotheist, because they're obviously dealing with a more than one or more than one and one, no matter how you cut it. So basically, you're pretty much including almost everybody else who has this sort of godhead or demonarchy or whatever sort of idea going on. Oh, well, they're monotheist too. So they came up with this term monotheistic to sort of mislead you.
That's that in itself is interesting, and you look at the Old Testament tale of Balaam, and it is basically an admission that the pagan gods are just as real as the Abrahamic God, but that only the Abrahamic God should be the one worshipped by his people. And so it's not a matter of like these gods don't exist, but these gods do exist, but you shouldn't worship them. And even looking at at the very beginning of Genesis, where it says Elohim created the heavens and the earth, that's a plural term, and so that there is the plurality.
Well, Semitic languages have that, but yeah, the Bible compiled a bunch of things. You find okay. The first English ones were not 66 books, 100 books. That tells you something there. You got 74 books mentioned, and if you look into the cuneiform text, some of these books are bigger than the Bibles that they have, and they're being referenced basically as authoritative in the Bible itself. And the Bible's obviously combining a bunch of things. You said some contradictions. Interesting enough, they talk about spelling errors. You think a God could reveal a book without spelling errors, right? But some of that, like they act like the word Satan is misspelled. It's not misspelled. You have a different word than Satan. You have a word ha-shatan, which means continual scourge. So continual scourge to what? So for some reason, they've been trying to make us forget about that. Just like Christians have made themselves forget what Messiah means, what Christ means, what Emmanuel means. If they took those literally, they'd know that Jesus isn't the God they make him out to be. Or at least if he is, then the rest of us are too.
Right. Yeah. And that was one of Jesus's greatest points that he tried to continually make, is that the equality of the spiritual equality of everyone, that there was no need for one person to worship or to wash the feet of another, but that we are all capable of the same things. And as he's transmuting water to wine, and as he's performing all these miracles, raising other people from the dead, including himself, he's saying, all that I've done, you can also do, and even greater things. He's saying, you think this is awesome, you can do better. You can do better. And and so
look at what, and you can see it. You can see the same thing happen with what they call Zoroastrianism. Is that the Mazda Yasna Zarathustra kind of had certain teachings left in it. Yes, but there were some issues that are written into the books. But the fact is that it takes, there's passages that take away the authority from the priesthood. Maybe you get somebody who learns more to lead, but we're all supposed to be our own priests and priestesses. That's why they called them magi in the first place, is because they were the religiously skilled people going about. It's like, because this was really, really weird at that time for teams of people to basically perform all their own rituals and stuff and going about. So they must be, some, but this is basically the standard of who these people were. But, and who's one of the enemies in the Jewish section of the Bible? Ha-Kohanim, the Cohens and the rabbis. Don't trust them with the book. They're not supposed to be the ones in charge, but they're the ones in charge.
Yeah, and that was also the case, obviously, with the New Testament, where Jesus's main adversaries were the Sanhedrin. He would make points just about every time he would start getting on his conspiracy theory tangents. He'd make points to call out the Sanhedrin and the scribes and the Pharisees as being the most corrupt. And once again, that I think that we can see a corollary to that today, where those who have been anointed and ordained are the least trustworthy among us. There are all sorts of interesting little, like I said, loopholes that are there that seem that they're just simply too obvious. And like you said, so could a God, especially the one God, dictate a work with spelling errors and with loopholes? Well, maybe only intentionally. I guess the more logical answer to that, if we were to assume that these are revealed works at all, that assumption would be based on obviously on faith, but that the book is not being penned by God's hand, but revealed to prophets through God's voice or inspiration. And so those prophets could definitely interpret it and put those spelling errors in there. But regardless, it does seem, well, that doesn't just seem, you look at the evidence of it, and the Bible was, it is not necessarily the original work. It is, it's been edited and proofread and revised over and over and over for on the most basic level, for the expedience of social programming, social engineering. But
it's like one of the most obvious ones. There's 1,500 versions. 1,500 Greek text for the New Testament. Different. But one of the most obvious ones is that they went back after Constantine and decided it didn't say Christ enough. And so they added. They added 30 more Christ for Constantine, and they added another 70 after Constantine, because they still didn't consider that they said Christ enough. and now everybody thinks it's his last name or something.
Yeah. Well, and Constantine himself was.
And interestingly enough, they start one of the interesting numbers that you find through Judaism, Islam, and Christianity is the number 19. And in the Bible, it's thought that Jesus originally had something that was in 19 parts. And some of the canonical gospels, well, written and compiled from a bunch of stuff, they tried to keep to that. They tried to keep to 19, but over time you ended up with maybe 9 more chapters, depending on which of the canonical gospels you're looking at. But they were always adding and subtracting. Something could be in the margin. But they chose stuff. I've seen a text of among the Jews, they would play. It was long before what you would call Kabbalah. They were arranging things by their number value and stuff like this, and maybe twisting the order of a word or picking something that has the same value. And there's a passage in Genesis, I believe, that says something like, "And there were 3," but it says who the 3 were. So it basically lists off a few angels instead of using this phrase. And there's other instances like that where, something changed from one version to the other, and they intentionally pick something else to put in its place.
Yeah, and all of that is and I would put a lot of that under the first category of like an engineered attempt, and that would have been super easy in a time when nobody could really read these texts except for the ordained, and then everybody else would have to rely on their interpretation. That makes it super easy to slip.
Yeah. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't. Before the Quran, you don't have any text where the standard people not only could see it, learn it for themselves and all that, but they also were able to correct the person up front doing their thing. The Zoroastrians, even until the 1700s, the fact that the people from the Christians, there's a lot of change. Now that we're not in Greek and Latin and stuff anymore, they're still changing the Bible. There was over 100 different King James versions of the Bible. I had no clue that the King James version was not just one King James version. Every couple of years, they would come up with a little bit different of one. The Apocrypha was originally in it, but or at least at some point it was in it. But not being able to correct the guy up front when he makes his mistakes in relating the Scripture, that can let things get in. One of the most famous incidences is of scriptural change. That's there was a Persian king, I forget what his name was, but he told this group of priests, "You don't see anything in your scripture," the tone he would have taken, "You don't see anything in your scripture that says I can't marry my daughter." And next thing you know, they have this next of kin marriage thing written in that nobody else wanted to practice, but it was written into the book, but it wasn't in the earlier versions.
That's interesting. Yeah, I wasn't aware of actually most of that, so that's very interesting stuff for sure.
Just like if the Bible was in the hand, you see different rulers in Europe, like with sexuality in particular. One guy would like hand jobs, one guy wouldn't, so they'd actually outlaw them or legalize them accordingly, or whatever the thing was, that there would be something sexual in particular. Or there's other examples that basically they write it in or take it out or something like that according to their own thing. It's like you wonder why Joseph Smith banned certain things for his followers, having 15 wives and 27 other women that he called for the afterlife.
Right.
That takes some guts right there.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, that guy had some balls for sure. He that. So in studying Joseph Smith, which I did really, really carefully, not necessarily during my first stint in the Mormon Church as I was growing up with it, but I left the church, engaged in witchcraft for a good several years before I hit a wall of taking everything way too far and being completely drug addicted and strung out all the time. And I weighed I think at one point 120 pounds at 6 feet tall, and that was I was losing control absolutely over everything in my life, and so I took a stab at the last sane moment in my life that I knew, which was back in the church, before I started questioning everything, before I hit that pubic age of pushing against, and went back to the church and spent about a year and a half there, and really got into it. I was starving for real knowledge of any sort. So I started reading a lot of Joseph Smith's works and his discourses and journals. And there was definitely a genius there, and a knowledge of being able to manipulate others. And obviously he wouldn't come out and say so, but it was very obvious that he was experimenting with the masses through what he was doing. I mean, even to the point where he's wearing, upon his death, he's wearing an amulet of Jupiter with a seal, and the seal of Jupiter, a square of Jupiter with the words.
He had at a lodge of as a Freemason, and had all these connections, which further would have enhanced what he was doing. But there's a reason why that type of Baptist, you can categorize, if you're going to categorize Christianity to 5 or 6 types, you'd have to put them in the Baptist category, yes, or you could say the apostolic category, because now they've been around. But you look at the fiction that he was said to have read, and you look at the Native American tribes, some twist and stuff on the name and his back, and what he would have been exposed to, learning some of the biblical language and stuff like this. Obviously, if you're using 15 different phrases and 15 different languages that don't really relate, and he just learned a handful of odd things. I'm not fooled there, but it's interesting the level of meaning that's buried, and the level of symbol that's buried in the text. It's like I'll throw out a word as something a little different. Like, for example, if I was to say 9 gatekeepers in the biblical language, Shaitan, let's include that one as one of the central ones, is gift of the sea beast. So gift of Tiamat, the Ton or the Tum, that sort of thing, is the older version of the name Tiamat. And you'll find that connected to pretty much every bad guy. Well, maybe not pretty much, but a lot of the so-called bad guys in the Book of Mormon, if you take their name and put them in the biblical language, it tells you something about the story, and very few people can do that. And so it's like he hid a lot of meaning and stuff into the thing. I've talked about the Ramiumtum is basically a okay, forget that realm of the Goetias. It's not pronounced Goetia, but Gothia, to give it a Greek pronunciation, or Goetia, to give it a Latin pronunciation. Too many people say things one way, and you end up saying it yourself. I've
always pronounced that Goetia. Interestingly, I just kind of Englishized it, but no, that's interesting.
Yeah, it kind of has this Chinese samurai sort of sound to it. Gothia. Yeah, so you'll find this meaning buried in. Basically, it hints at some sort of a middle pillar, right? And the Golden Dawn weren't the first people to do this sort of thing. So I went to the Georgia Guidestones, which is basically a Luciferian monument, and I basically performed my middle pillar rite. Apparently, a bunch amongst with conservative Christians off to the side. Apparently, when I was over with the thing, but they didn't understand what I was doing. So, chanting out the demon names in the biblical language. But that's sort of a start to it. It's kind of to narrow things down into shapes is not always the easiest, and you kind of want to figure out what was going on. But yeah, it'd be interesting to know if there's it's like Mormon and Moroni. Those are actually names of demons. If you go into Mesopotamia, which is, I don't know, but some of it he could have just been garbling stuff. It's like he was asked to name some kid, and okay, my Lzwvmmh language sounds like garbling, but I'm finding meaning to it. So, and even artistically, whatever, one's allowed to play with forms. But yeah, except for a few examples, I think he was consciously trying to work meaning into something, or at least had some experience to put something into something.
Yeah, that is one of the drawbacks, I guess, of being a prophet of any sort, is that that people will bring you just about anything that's unknown and expect you to have some sort of knowledge or understanding of it. You know, we see this with the hypocephalus of Sheshang that appears in the Pearl of Great Price, which he gave some really interesting associations with and that appears as a round seal. And he gave associations of that to the celestial kingdom, and the three levels of glory, 3 degrees of glory, and basically turned it into a sort of a sigil that could activate the gates of the celestial kingdom to open. And so I took this symbol and kind of redrew it and cleaned it up a bit, and sent it off to some people that I know who are much more adept at language than I am, and they looked at it and said, "Well, first off, you know, nothing that has been assumed by," and I didn't tell them where I'd gotten it, and they weren't familiar, and so they said, "Well, whoever you sent this to, whoever gave you these descriptions for it, they don't know what they're talking about, because this is you know, obviously Egyptian, and here's what this means," and they broke it down, and it's like not at all even close to what Joseph Smith has said it means, but.
Well, it's a divination. Obviously, there was no translation going on. But if you look at it in the Christian sort of Baptist way, how would I render this Egyptian stuff into a Christian message? And it makes sense from that aspect. And then you realize when you look at all that stuff, oh, only for the temple and all this stuff, all these techniques are available to me. And that's why I said, you know, Zoroastrianism and Islam and stuff, the techniques and all that are open to the public. Some of the practices have gone away. It'd be neat if you could show up at your random mosque and at 6 in the morning and say, "I had a dream. Let's talk about it." But that's what they used to do. They don't. I don't know if they do that anywhere. I certainly haven't heard it myself. If I'm driving through a strait and I've heard of that, I might want to stop there after around sunrise or something. But you know. One of the things that you may have heard of happened with the early LDS Church was that people started to come forward and said, "Hey, I've been scrying with rocks too, and I've been starting to get stuff." And that was a little bit hard to deal with, so they took Joseph Smith's rocks and put them away, and not even the people who led the church were using them anymore.
Yeah, well, and you know, a lot of that. Well, Joseph Smith was actually pretty. He was a bit democratic with the idea of prophecy, and that he anointed several women as being prophetesses, and that was a practice that died out immediately upon his
Well,
death.
just like after he died, it was another 100-something years before they had another black priesthood holder. He pretty much immediately had one of his buddies from the lodge be a priesthood holder, and there wasn't anybody who showed Negro after that until the Civil Rights Act who had any level of authority in that church, which is very problematic for a lot of Romney, I think it was, when Romney ran for president. It was like, you shouldn't have needed the Civil Rights Act. So how do you explain this? So he kind of swept it under the rug. But a lot of the stuff that people say, it's like the laws change from time to place, whatever. California is kind of New Jersey. I was messaged. I had to block someone today because they were saying, well, I don't know if it's still legal for people to have sex with their post-18 or post-21 children or whatnot in New Jersey, and people to marry their sisters and stuff. But that, you know, see, that's proof that, you know, being such a sociopath, you have to wait for the government to tell you what's right and wrong. It's, you know, it's just going too far. Or in California or New York, where you can marry a 12-year-old, it just doesn't show up in the thing, who hasn't hit puberty. Puberty is not even a requirement for consummating a marriage in some states in this country. So I think that's going too far too. But so they criticize the church based on whatever the laws are now or whatever is popular now, and that doesn't make any sense. And
yeah, no, it's
but I mean, going off on a tangent there, one of the most obvious things is that buried in these spiritual texts, like some of these texts are rituals in themselves. If you've ever sat down and listened to the Arabic of the Quran, or the Avestas and Avestan, or a lot of the Vedic chants, not just some brief chant or something. They call it Samskrita because they've basically sat down and refined and ordered what they had to create a certain effect, and it does connect that effect. Some of these texts, if you don't know what it means, if you don't believe in its spiritual authority, it's still having the effect. I don't know if you see colors and all that with this stuff, but
yeah, well, I think that's probably the case for just about any I would say true spiritual practice. Obviously, when you get into even using the word true, that instantly sets up red flags, and as it should. But any real verifiable spiritual process, which I would just lump under the term magic, that it does affect people, anybody, regardless of their belief in it. Rather, that. Yeah, and once again, to touch on music, because even though I don't possess the musical talent, I am currently working with folks who do, and we're looking at how to target specific brainwave states, and then to tie that in with the what I'm calling audio sigils of these scripts. You can take a sigil or any two-dimensional impression of something, and get an output of what that would sound like if it were a sound. And we're mixing all of these together to produce an evocation soundtrack. And it does tend to work, whether or not you're wanting it to or even know about it. That it does evoke that essence there that is tangible, measurable, and that we're able to actually determine. Well, a person listened to Belial's sigil, audio sigil, with all the accoutrements, and they report an identity or a presence that is identical to Belial's. So these things, especially the most ancient things that we do within spirituality, do tend to have their effect, whether or not we are aware of it or in league with it at all.
And very, I mean, musical scale was built, and some other elements were built into the, not as profoundly as certain stuff that I've seen or stuff that I've mentioned here, but the Babylonians, their cuneiform tablets, they figured out certain systems, and once those systems, then they could interchange. And that's one of the things that you learn, even if you don't take it back further. That if you pick up the Bible, you pick up the Quran, you see forms that can be reworked in different ways, or you can take it and have your own intention. I met this guy. I didn't know what he was at the time, but there was this guy, and he showed up to he would come to a masjid all the far more than was thought to be required or anything like that. But inside, he wasn't Muslim. His intentions were to dedicate the whole thing to Iblis. And that's what he did. So inside he was, and you can use, you can use some of the energy. I was like, I'll turn on the Christmas thing. And I was like, I don't believe in a lot of what's being said, but you can use some of the energy and what you get along with and whatnot, and kind of move with that sort of thing. It's like some people I've seen some people run away from certain services. It's like, I knew a guy with Native American stuff that would like run away from traditional Muslims. That if he thought they were going to pray, he'd like leave the area and stuff. It's like, well, because he was afraid of what they'd say when they weren't being out loud. So he kind of would, I guess, go and hide or something. I don't know what. But he might as well have just said his own thing, or use some of the energy going on for his own purposes. But that's not what he did.
Yeah, that's interesting because I remember very clearly the first time I saw a Muslim fellow praying. I was working at a fast food joint and went on break. I was 18 years old. Went on break and went outside to go smoke a cigarette and eat a hamburger. And I see this fellow that takes his mat out and kneels down on the ground, faces east, and starts praying. Um, and I was full swing occultist at that point, and I'm watching this going, wow, that is. And first off, it's a beautiful thing to stop everything you're doing and to engage in this prayer. And I also remember looking at it and going, wow, if only I could have that kind of discipline with the things that I could do. And that is something I see is lacking from the occult in general, is having that degree of discipline, taking it to a religious intensity. And for my own self, especially in working with these gatekeepers, I've definitely been driven to that religious intensity. And what you can do when you stop being afraid of being too religious is pretty remarkable for sure.
Well,
But yeah,
and you realize the difference between, okay, here's something I can do all the time, and okay, maybe I'll do that, but here, there's an extent that you can take it to on occasion, but not all the time. Like in Israel, you get pulled off the street if they don't have enough people in the synagogue because they make the services so long. I mean, they'll literally make the dawn prayer. I mean, all this stuff, all these rules and regulations were extended upon in a time where people had to work less than half as much. So that was kind of why. But they'd get up at dawn and start praying. So you start seeing these little vertical streaks in the sky of the coming twilight. So as soon as the horizontal streaks started, then they would start their prayer. Around sunrise, they'd go silent, and then they'd start praying again for a little bit. And it's like, that's too long of a prayer service to just fill the place with. But being able to do that on occasion is, it's like, I've done path working. Well, I call it the Gachtaya path working because it's not quite the same. It's not a Christian process. So I want to distinguish in at least that much. But I have a 5-minute version of the ritual, but then some of them have gone close to 3 hours and stuff. So.
yeah, there's a ritual. I can't remember what pharaoh it was, but there was a ritual that was given to this pharaoh. Yeah, so what I'm about to say, I guess, is more urban legend than anything because I haven't verified it. But the urban legend is that there was a pharaoh who received an instruction from Ra that if he did this particular ritual, a three day ritual that with the help of several other people, that he would always be strong, have his vitality, he'd have a long life, and he would never be overthrown. And the ritual is
The Seddet festival, probably.
Perhaps it's a very astronomically based ritual that you have the different rings of planetary influence, and Mercury being the first, obviously around a fireplace, and for 3 days you keep the fire burning, and somebody must be dancing for the entire 3 days, and so people will come in and take over while another person goes and takes a break. But the first circle is dancing fast, and there's drumming going on. There's usually some sort of musical accompaniment, and in the first ring you're dancing fast, and then it kind of winds out slower and slower as you go further out towards Saturn, and the circumambulation dance is exhausting, and at the same time, yeah, I guess getting yourself to that point of exhaustion is often the point of a lot of ceremony.
The sun dance, if you've heard of the sun dance of some of the southwestern tribes.
Yeah. And that's supposed to be done on the equinoxes, and so twice a year to do this thing, and twice a year is good for doing a 3-day event. I mean,
and to bring up fiction, there's two things that I'm kind of reminded of here that fictionally do have roots in very ancient rituals is that on one, Lovecraft and the people who were inspired directly by Lovecraft tended to talk about when the stars were right. Actually, I don't know if they tended to, but it was a very repeated theme with all those authors. So the stars being just right. And in the Vedic text, you're familiar with the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavatam goes into this more, but they would even change in the stories the astronomical alignments to match in with the story. Or perhaps sometimes you find out that just like the Christian story, Krishna is really 4 different people if you look into the historical record. None of them, servant of Krishna was like one of them, but none of so they embody. They say, oh, this is God, and let's separate this. And but before that, it was 4 different characters, so you find the stories being blended together. But another element that you see, the Stargate, I tried that, and yeah, that is a trip. You really do go screeching through some colored, but it's not. I mean, you can imagine it based on the movie, but it's not like that. So, I mean, it isn't quite how the Order of Nine Angles kind of describes it, but you can use, stars that you consider sinister, or stars that you consider whatever. I don't believe in good or bad symbols, or positive or negative symbols. I don't think there's even a positive or negative symbol. It doesn't really quite pan out that way. I mean, you can say solar or lunar to a degree, but so yeah, you can bend these things to your own thing, and one too important. It's like when you're working spiritual traditions, whether it's grimoire or otherwise. There's the and we said Islam backs up this thing, is that okay? There's the obedience, but it's a symbol, so you're supposed to remember it's a symbol. And the Yezidi Book of Revelation, as it's called, in its 5th chapter, says to honor the symbol and image. It will remind you of what you have neglected in my laws and ordinances. And I mean, I do have the Arabic here, but it doesn't have the vowel mark, so I'm going to probably mess that one up there. I mean, it's not necessary. It's not like we're holding a ritual here, but the symbols and stuff, they teach you something. And if you look back in history, what do you find? What do you think are the oldest types of symbols, and what do you think is coming back as the type of symbols? It's the same answer.
Right.
It's the sexual and the psychological symbols, and people freak out. For example, I remember a neighbor went up to me. It's like, did you realize the Kaaba has a big vagina on it? And it's like, yeah, I've known that since I was a kid. I think it was never a big deal to me, but apparently to him it was a big deal. That and they have little penises in their books to signify. It's like, yeah, so.
Yeah. No, interestingly, in Ashtanga Yoga, the eightfold or 8-path yoga, you have yama, which is control, and that usually goes along with disciplines, brahmacharya and such, where you're excluding certain things from your daily life. You're making yourself more pious and more disciplined, and then that's immediately followed by niyama, which most of the time gets translated over as observances. It's things that you're going to add in to your disciplines, such as certain prayers, incantations, mantra, devotions. But in 8 lectures on yoga by Crowley, he really does a good job of looking at the terms used and exposing that a bit. And so you've got yama being control. Niyama, the prefix ni is basically a reversal of yama, a reversal of control. And so once you take the admonitions of the things that you shouldn't do, that the next step should be to reverse those, to find out what you should do by engaging in all of those things, by turning them upside down and seeing what you can shake loose. So yeah,
I'm not sure how familiar you are with the character Carol Poke Runyon.
a little bit.
Um,
Enough to respect the fuck out of him.
Yeah, he's what provoked the. It's like he basically pointing out him and his crew pointing out that. I mean, I hadn't personally gone down to California and interacted with them in person, but just like I didn't personally interact with that Egyptian cult that basically said all the basically all these masks are referring to the same thing, and you can use that and Nefri, or I don't remember what it does. They actually had a temple at some point, I think, but yeah, that's what Runyon says too. Is like respect these things you call up. Thank you very much. You know, automatically cursing them and all that other stuff. But he got the oh, what was the point? I don't even know what point I was going to make with that. But the fact the language thing. So understand. I know it's super dry and boring to a lot of people, and I get every complaint on my channel practically is because I'm going over the language or something, or because I didn't kill anybody, so I don't have a real temple or some weird thing like that. I mean, well, actually, the Christians are the ones that comment the most. It's like this is all well and good, but if you don't have Jesus, but Carol Poke Runyon and his use of bringing out the techniques and making this experienceable for so many people is something that really had to offer. But okay, here I am. I'm sorry for winding this one, but in the Beyond Lemuria, I wish they would have done it as a full 10. They edited the thing in a way, just add another minute, have the whole thing that you're talking about, but they basically had the positive commandments instead of the negative commandments. And I don't know, I've kind of in my seasonal rites and trips and stuff, I've kind of tried to keep to some of that thing, is have it both be a teaching and an experience sort of oriented thing. But, you know, except for the Great Heat Festival in August, everything's pretty much either it's a balance or it's go off and do something, that sort of thing. It's because the Great Heat Festival kind of, well, actually, I guess that's kind of positive. You know, you go through the Egyptian list of 42, I didn't do this sort of thing. But yeah, not having everything be a don't. It's like you even pick up tonic itself, and most of the commandments are positive ones, not negative ones.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. And you know, I do have to run here soon, but to the subject of the conversation, though, the loopholes or the plot holes or the errors in all of these scriptures, to me, they seem to be, and I'd like to get your take on this in a second, but to me, they seem like they're intentional. And the message that I'm kind of getting from a lot of them is that no matter what pantheon we're looking at, that the gods aren't worthy of our worship. That's made kind of really clear, that you start looking at the god figures, and for the most part, they're all pretty detestable. You know, they're not figures that you would invite to your home to have dinner with you. Why would you worship them at all? And so, if they're not to be worshipped, they're to be understood as examples of ourselves and maybe our more contemptible traits, and to hopefully avoid those, to not do as God has done. You know, it's very telling that God Himself seems to break just about every commandment that He makes, and
or bring out a quality in a way that's different.
Well, sorry, what was that?
Or bring out the certain quality in a way that's different.
Right. Yeah. Well,
the thing I find for the most part is that some of these issues are because the priests have tried to come in and justify themselves and try to make themselves sound better than the people way back when. So it's like Solomon, and some of the stories about Solomon weren't originally part of the story. So why did they add those in?
Oh yeah, no, yeah. A lot of the tales about Solomon and the amazing things he did with his wisdom are interesting little nursery rhymes more than anything. They don't seem to have a basis in anything scriptural at all.
But if you know the connections, I mean, aside from the changes and obviously corruptions by passing it down or on purpose or whatever, you do see stuff definitely linked. I think one of the things they tried to do is they tried to edit out. They were trying to put this stuff together, and they were trying to edit some stuff out, but they always left something in. and I don't think it was always intentional that they were leaving stuff in. It was like they were trying to edit it out, and they missed something, and that something kind of takes you beyond that path that they're doing. It's like, I forget what the guy's name was, but some guy like, I don't know, back in 1200 or something like this, was going around going around somewhere in the Muslim world and saying, hey, all these he actually opened up a school where he said all these books of traditional interpretation aren't welcome in my school. We're going to get back, we're going to get into philosophy and stuff like this, and where you can make your own conclusions and all this other stuff. And they didn't kill him, they killed other people, but they didn't kill him. So that kind of idea kind of resurges itself every once in a while. And of course they're labeled they're radical extremists and all that stuff, but it's really the monarchs and stuff. That's one of the tricks, is that it's like they throw out this term anti-Semite, when the Semites are a bunch of brown-skinned, black, woolly-haired people. I mean, if you're born that way, whatever, but don't claim to be a Semite when you're just some white German-based whatever. But they're always some. I'm not saying all those people do that, but definitely they'll throw out that term to distract people, and really they're the ones. Like right now, while all this has been going on, there was an attack on Iran. Some cyber attack that started a fire, and they'll do massacres, and there'll be a massacre in Israel of up to thousands of people, and then they'll throw out this anti-Semitism to try to distract people from what they're doing to the actual Semites, the brown-skinned people that lived there in the first place. But there's a lot of that going on, is they'll throw something out to kind of distract people from whatever.
Yeah, no, that's a really easy, even adolescently easy way of distracting people from the actual context and content, is to just do a bit of a straw man name calling. Go ahead and just call it an anti-Semite, rather than looking at first off, what the person who is name calling is actually up to, and then what the opponent that they're calling the names of is, or that their name calling is what they're actually trying to put out there. It's like, we're seeing this ramping up pretty intensely with the whole cancel culture and social justice warriors, that you're not allowed to say just about anything as a white male. I'm supposed to just kind of sit and be quiet, because
I've been banned from whole internet servers because I don't hate that fact that I'm a white male, and don't denigrate myself to like or accept whatever false accusation is thrown out at me. You seem like a nice guy who women will want to do things for that they might not otherwise do. That means you're a rapist. No, it doesn't.
Right.
I finally figured that one out when I saw some of the other stuff that was going on there outside of the platform I was kicked off of. But behind the great thing nowadays is ancient, modern, whatever. All this stuff is available for us to do just that. To go back and look at these sources for ourselves and make our own conclusions, use them to our own intentions, and find out, take those same techniques, and just like the Babylonians switching names and tablets, do what we want with these things. And but unless you had some closing thought, this didn't actually turn out like an interview, but this turned out okay for my interpretation. So
yeah, no, a great conversation nonetheless, and that regardless of what interpretation an individual might arrive to, at that point in time, and for whatever you're trying to view through that lens, it tends to be correct in that it guides you towards something. I don't know. I do think that there is the possibility for some sort of universal truth. I just think we're a long ways away from ever understanding that, and so we've got come to more of a subjective truth of you know, how does this idea ring for me? What do I interpret it as, and how does that inform how I go about my life and my spiritual practice? And I think if we can arrive to those, then we can get a little bit closer to that universal truth.
Well, at least if there is universal truth, there's some certain particulars to things. It's like, okay, it's like I mentioned, okay, there could be things you could do all the time. It's like the Dalai Lama, Muhammad, Zoroaster, whatever, or some guru saying, hey, every few hours or every visible difference in the sky, you know, that sort of thing, that you could say, you know, in the afternoon you do take a couple minutes, in the when you get up at dawn you can take a couple minutes, that sort of thing. You know, there could be universal stuff that people can do, but then there's specific stuff that we could do. It's like we all have our own skills and stuff. We all have our own psychology. That's one of the things about path working in particular, is that you think, oh, you know, if you actually path work, it can surprise you, because you realize that when you go through the rest of it, oh, I thought I only had to you know, only had to call it Vine. So the person calls it Vine, but it turns out to get done with Vine, either they had to do something before or after to get this kind of going. But you know, you do, even though I do believe there are objective realities to spiritual natures, and I've experienced some of that, there's certainly the subjective aspect. So when you go through the thing, you're subjectively going through different packages, and it's supposed to represent your whole psychology in a way. That's why we're told about these 72 sects and all sorts of stuff. But you know, you reminded me of something. Joseph Campbell. I mean, he got his he was reinterpreting Jung and some other stuff. But one of the things he talked about is the 4 functions of mythology. You got the way, you know, you got your social function, you got your mystical function, you got your cosmological function, and you got your pedagogical function, you know, so your way that you walk about life. And if a myth is true, it's going to have more than the literal side to it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and layers.
And language translations, I've seen that too, is that you can break things down. You have a very literal way of translating things. And they really don't, when you're talking about the Bible, there's a lot of mysteries that when you literally know what it says, maybe even none of the translations you can get a hold of are saying that, actually. It's like, they talk about this being a fire. It's kind of like a human. Oh, so there's this other creation that has like this, you know, basically like every other non-Judaic Christian mythology. Islam talks about a difference between the angels and that sort of thing. But you know, so there's little hints in there, and you find a lot more demon names, by the way, if you look at the language rather than the translation. But yeah, there's just different things you can do with it. So if there is truth, there's like different psychological types. And well, I guess one closes here, but. You know, it's you know, Satanism obviously isn't some reactionary faith alone. There's more to it than that, and you know, it's okay. No, I didn't really have much.
Yeah, and well, and you know, and returning again to Zoroastrianism and the Avestas, that I think that's a closer approximation to the truth than Christianity, in that Ora Mazda and Angra Mainyu are equal opposites. And I think that's a bit closer to what we're looking at when we look at you know, the Lord of Light and the Lord of Darkness. That these are the forces, and perhaps even the consciousnesses of creation and light versus darkness and chaos, and that they are equal, but at the same time they're equal, and they are needed. They're yin and yang. They're needed to interplay with each other in order to have anything that is anything. Otherwise, it would just be an amorphous.
And of course, in between the you know, in between there's the egregores, and the egregores can serve their purpose too, even though they're just thought forms. But
yeah, well, it's funny when people say, you know, just thought forms, or that's just your imagination. Well, what is greater than the ability to think and the ability to imagine something that doesn't exist. And that is the foundation of all of everything that we create, all of our technology. The house that I'm living in, I had to imagine what it looked like before I could get the contractor to do anything with it.
And you can have effects on people that share some of these same thought forms. You know, if you know there's a correlation between this and that, then you know, it's like the apparitions. It's like people will you know, they'll work with the same forms, and then they'll all sort of have the same experience spontaneously, almost like in the same spot or something, even though they were looking in different directions or something.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, absolutely. This has been harnessed by state and church for forever, and you know, I think we are entering into an uber democratic phase where even democracy isn't democratic enough for us, and each person, your individual interpretation, your individual experience is tantamount to the experience of the whole. We're entering into interesting times where it is not only important that each of us come to our own conclusions about things, but that it is essential that we do in order to stimulate the evolution of the whole, that we all turn the attention as firmly as we can onto ourselves and how we interpret these things, how we apply them in our lives, how they inform our daily lives and our magical or religious practices. Yeah, the individual is more important now, I think, than ever before. And so, yeah.
And to you know, to connect it to the whole yoga tantra thing, it's like no one's going to make those connections for us except ourselves. No one's going to make that no one's going to establish our identity in any real detail except ourselves. It's not even something inherited. You know, we got to actually work something up. The Confucian idea of Li, you know, and Ren. So Li's ritual, and Ren is the superior character. You know, it's more than you know, to non-genderify it. But yeah, I'll let you go, and I'll close with your with this new order of your name in Lzwvmmh. So Vdoz which, you know, one's noticed an interesting thing that I can do with those is that rearranging them according to what's being referred to. So.
Beautiful. And I do have to say that yeah, in the interviews that we've had, that your ability to use mantra incantation and such is absolutely impressive. I know that you know, just looking at the comments, there are people that have appreciated it, and I've definitely appreciated it, and thank you.